the rise of the nones, N-O-N-E-S, okay? And what nones are those people who have said that they have no specific religious affiliation. And that does not mean that they are atheist or agnostic. It simply means they're not Presbyterian, Methodist, Catholic, Jewish, Buddhist, whatever. They don't subscribe to any one particular faith. It does not mean that they don't have a sense of spirituality. But when asked, what is your religious affiliation, they check none. To give you a sense of how the magnitude of this, 24% of the U.S. population now self-identifies as no religious affiliation. And that's up from 16% just 10 years ago. Furthermore, the non-religious are now the nation's largest religious voting bloc. You with me? In other words, when you look at what the religious voting blocks are, the no religion, is now the largest voting bloc, accounting for 20% of all registered voters. So as you can imagine, these types of shifts and trends have tremendous implications on society and business. So, I mentioned that I don't like the D word, diversity. I don't really use it that much. I use the words people not like you. Because my definition of diversity is way broader than just racial and ethnic diversity. My definition of diversity is any way you can be different from me. Do you have children, ma'am? She has children. I don't. We're both women. We're both white. Let's just say we're the same age. I can tell you're way younger, okay, but let's just say. So we're both women, we're both white, let's say we're the same age, let's say we live in the same zip code, and let's say that we even make the same household income. On paper, she and I would look the same. We have all these demographic characteristics in common. But you know and I know that if you have children and I don't, we're going to be different in every way that really matters. She's going to make decisions differently than I am. The pressures and priorities on her are going to be different than mine. And that has nothing to do with our race, our gender, our age, or anything. It simply has to do with parenthood. So my list of diversity is very broad. Here's my list. Yours could be different. Gender. Men are different from women, right? And it really is true. I mean, there's comedians who make their entire living riffing off of this, but it really is true. Women use something like 20,000 more words a day than men. I know, my husband, I've been married a long time, and apparently I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but I was apparently telling him about my day once in excruciating detail, and I guess he'd had enough, because he goes like this to me. He goes, "What is that?" It's like trying to mute me. Don't do that. If you value the woman in your life, do not do that. Sleep on the couch for 2 nights. All right. But women are also more demonstrative than men. We're much more likely to hug and kiss and express emotion. Religious differences. There's no doubt that there's all kinds of religions that we're dealing with now. Political views. And I don't just say this and throw this up here because we just went through a contentious political election. We've always had our differences. Age and generational differences. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. There's no doubt that someone who's a mature or a baby boomer is very different than someone who's Gen X or Gen Y. The LGBTQ community, and in case you're wondering what the Q stands for, it stands for questioning. Physical abilities, emotional abilities, mental abilities. How about rural versus metro? Who would understand this better than you? Someone who lives in a loft in Manhattan is very different than someone who lives on, a farm in West Texas or a ranch in West Texas. So even rural areas and metro areas can be different. What about military civilian? There's 2 totally different worlds. Race. There's only 5. Everyone on the planet falls into one of these 5 races. Everything else is a term. White, black, Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander. These are the terms. So there's no such race, for example, as Caucasian. There's no such race as Asian. Those are terms. They're not bad terms. They're not racist. They're just not correct. These are the correct terms for race. There's no such race as African American. The correct term is black. So white, black, Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander doesn't mean people don't have preferences. I know a lot of people who self-describe themselves as Caucasian or whatever. I'm just saying these are the 5 races. But of course, we also have ethnic and linguistic differences. Hispanic is not a race. It's an ethnicity. Or if you're from India, then your race is Asian, but your ethnicity is Indian. Speaking of that, nativity. I think somebody who's foreign born would look at the United States and the world with a very different lens than someone who's US born. Life stage. Who would know this better than you? A new mom or a new dad is in a very different place, emotionally, financially, everything, than someone who's an empty nester, a retiree, or a college student. White collar and blue collar, those are two totally different worlds. Even professional level, somebody who's entry level and has been working for 6 months is very different than someone who's been working for 3 decades. Core values. You know, if you take that plastic bottle of water when you're finished with it and you throw it into the recycling bin versus the trash, that is the simplest little action in the world that you're doing, just tossing it into one bin versus another. But it tells me something about you. It tells me something about your values. Maybe I'm trying to do my part. Make sure it goes into the recycling bin. What about things like different education levels, high school, college, etc.? Introverts versus extroverts. Anybody work with somebody who's really introverted or somebody who's very extroverted? They have totally different work styles. Some people like to work alone. Other people are much more collaborative. Creative versus analytic thinking. Corporate versus nonprofit sector. Office workers versus people who work from home. Marital status. Parents versus non-parents. And even within parents, you have single parents, step parents, etc. And what about even regional differences? The North and the South are different. The East Coast and the West Coast are different. The list goes on and on. Any way you can be different. I was doing this presentation one time and this woman yells out from the audience. I think she thought it was an interactive exercise. And she goes, "I got one for your list." I said, "What's that?" And she goes, "Pet owners." And I'm like, totally. Pet owners are their own cult, right? And then this guy yells out and he goes, "I got one for the list." I said, "What's that?" And he goes, "Gun owners." And I'm like, whoa, okay. So, I mean, the list goes on and on. Any way that you could be different from me. We are all working with and serving and selling to people who are different from us. So, one of the ways that you can see that this is a trend and not a fad is that when major companies start to embrace this in ways that you and I can see, it's because it works. So, 40% of people who are 18 to 35 have 4 or more tattoos. Not a tattoo, we're talking 4 or more. The percent who have a tattoo is 62%. So the vast majority of an entire generation actually have ink. My point is, as a marketing professional and a business person, is that if an entire generation has ink, then wouldn't we want to start showing people who look like that? And we're starting to see that. This is a billboard for a bank in Philadelphia, East River Bank. And it says, "Philly's most advanced neighborhood bank." That's, I believe, kind of code for saying we're progressive. We're a forward-thinking progressive bank. And it makes sense because their locations are in the city center where they're likely to have a lot of young urban people who are their customers. So if your core customers are young, urban professionals, maybe they're single, etc., they're out and about, then it makes sense that this woman's haircut is kind of edgy. But my point is, look at her left arm. Her left arm is an entire sleeve of ink. And this is a bank. Banking is one of the most conservative industries there is. So when a bank is putting out a billboard that has a woman with ink down her arm, I guarantee you it's not because it's driving customers away. It's pulling customers in because they look at that and they say, you know what, I relate to that. That looks like me. People want to see the real. We don't really want perfection anymore. We want authentic, and we want images that we can relate to. There is a reason why every ad that you are ever going to see in your life for retirement financial services features people with gray hair. It's because at that stage of your life, that's what you relate to. So, anybody see the Cheerios ad last year on television? The Cheerios ad with the interracial couple? So if you haven't seen it, it's an interracial couple, a black dad, a white mom, and an adorable little girl. And the little girl says, "Mommy, why do we eat Cheerios?" And Mommy says, "Because it's good for Daddy's heart." And then the little girl goes into the living room where Daddy's sleeping, and she dumps the whole box of Cheerios on his chest because it's good for his heart. That was the end of the ad. They didn't go and check out our cool interracial family. They didn't have to. They just showed a family. Honey Maid, the nation's only graham cracker? Have you ever thought about it? They don't have any competition. Honey Maid, the nation's only graham cracker, is running a campaign right now that features no models, no actors, nothing but real people and real families. And one of their families that and their tagline is a wholesome snack for all wholesome families. And one of their families that they feature is a gay couple with children, wholesome dadvertising from Honey Maid. CoverGirl makeup embraces diverse beauty. They have their first Muslim model now, because if you're an observant Muslim, you cover your hair. And if you're a woman and you cover your hair, then all of the focus on your features is on your eyes and your lips. And so fashion-forward Muslim women want to look as attractive as anybody else, and so mascara and lipstick become very, very important. CoverGirl also has their first cover boy, and he has YouTube tutorials, and he wears way more makeup than I do. And Target ads feature kids with Down syndrome. Now, Target makes their money, their core money, on children's clothing and children's toys. So don't all children wear clothing? And don't all children play with toys? I've already told you how old I am, and I tell you that as a frame of reference because in my lifetime, I've seen a shift. In my lifetime, I've seen a shift that there was a time when children like this were hidden away, and we don't hide them away anymore. We celebrate children, all children. So you're working with people who are not like you. How many of you are working with somebody, based on my very, very, very broad definition, how many of you are working with people who are not like you? Raise it up. All right. Most of you are now, according to whatever definition you want, because in my opinion there is no broad definition, most of you raised your hands. You're working with people who are not like you. You might be working with people who are of different races or ethnicities, hold different religious views, are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, are from a generation that you don't relate to, may not speak English well, are from a country or a culture that you're not familiar with, or of the opposite gender, or even simple things like tech savvy versus tech phobic. All of these ways we can be different from one another. And believe me, if you're frustrated when you're working with someone who's not like you, trust me, they can be frustrated working with you too. One of the most profound and common examples I get all the time are people who are older, let's say my age, people who have been working for a while, who are frustrated by working with millennials. And they'll say, why do they think that they don't have to pay their dues? Everybody wants to be president of the company by the time they're 28. Why do they think they get to go to their yoga class at 4 o'clock? They're just like, where's the work ethic? They're arguing about this and bitching about it. And the young people are like, how come he can't open an attachment? There's frustration on both sides. So how do you understand somebody who's not like you? The only frame of reference that you have is yours. You don't know what it's like to be anybody else, and you never will. I don't yet know what it's like to be 80 years old. I don't know, and I never will know, what it's like to be a guy. I don't know what it's like to be a mom. I don't know what it's like to live on a farm. I don't know what it's like to be in the military. I don't know what it's like to be black, Hispanic, Asian, or Native American. And I don't know what it's like to own a dog. These are things that I don't know. But I promise you that just because I'm not those things, have those things, live that way, that doesn't mean that I couldn't meaningfully connect with someone who is, does, etc., has those things. The way that you connect with somebody who's not like you is to understand that what makes you you is not the color of your skin or the shape of your eyes or how old you are or where you live. It is your priorities, it is your values, and it is the experiences that define you. That's what makes you you. And all of this shapes perspective. And perspective is never wrong. No one's perspective is ever wrong. Your perspective is never wrong. His perspective is never wrong. Your boss's perspective is never wrong. David's perspective is never wrong. No one's. Your spouse, no one's perspective is ever wrong. It's how you see the world. It's kind of like your opinion. I can't tell you that your opinion is wrong. I might respectfully offer another opinion or another perspective for you to consider, but I can't tell you that you're wrong. So try this exercise sometime if you want to see how different perspective can be. When asked the exact same question, people will answer it in entirely different ways based solely on their perspective. When asked to name how Kennedy died, matures and baby boomers will say a gunshot wound in Dallas. Gen X will say a plane crash near Martha's Vineyard. And Gen Y will say, Kennedy who? Or try this one. Who is Ron Howard? If you're of a certain age, you're going to say, Opie. If you're a baby boomer like me, you're likely to say, Richie from Happy Days. And if you're Gen X or Gen Y, you're likely to say, an award-winning director. You see, everybody knows who Ron Howard is. The only thing that changes is how we know him. The only thing that changes is our perspective. And none of these are right or wrong, because he's all of these things. They're all correct. It's just in how you see him.